folks, welcome back to the Contrarians. Today Marco here is going to be in the hot seat and he's going to be talking about acdc. Before we get started, we'd like to just show you a quick book that our colleague Martin Popoff has written. As you know, if you've seen him in the other episodes, he is the knowledge base that makes Contrarians possible. So check out his website and check out the book. You definitely won't be disappointed.
Where he's going to go way in depth in all these albums that we're going to discuss today.
Mm-hmm.
So check it out, acdc album by album.
So, that being said, album by album, what's your favorite acdc album?
Well, we have a lot of acdc albums to choose from, and this is definitely a contrarian choice. I'm going to go with High Voltage, which is up right here, and I love this artwork as well. Like, you look at that, that's art. You could hang that in your house. I think that's really cool. Just classic Angus Young, you know, and that's the way he would look for the next 30 years. He still dresses that way too, right? But I would go with High Voltage. On the way here, on the way anywhere in my car, I put on High Voltage, and all I want to do is step on the gas pedal. I just want to hit 100 wherever I'm going. I love High Voltage. I can't stress that enough. I think it's their best album. I know you're going to bring up Back in Black, which is solid, and it's super hard to argue that. But Back in Black, maybe Highway to Hell are probably the other two albums you might choose to argue against High Voltage. And to be honest, even though it is a contrarian choice, I think it's the best early acdc album, and I think it stacks right up there, at least neck and neck with those two albums. You could take some of the songs off of Back in Black, which you could list for me now.
Well, just going through the songs, you've got Back in Black, Hell's Bells, Shoot to Thrill, You Shook Me All Night Long, Have a Drink on Me. I'm not even going to name them all. Like, that right there is enough songs to be like a decade's worth of radio hits for a band. And that's not even all the songs on the album. I'm sure I'm omitting a couple.
It's hard to hear that lineup of songs and argue against that. But I mean, some of the songs off of High Voltage, I would stack up against the songs from Back in Black. I mean, It's a Long Way to the Top, High Voltage, TNT. I would stack those up against Shook Me All Night Long, Back in Black, Shoot to Thrill. Like, they're almost, to me, those songs are neck and neck. And High Voltage is just like, it's rock and roll, man. And if you're a fan of acdc, and I've brought up this argument before, but like, you know, like my cousin Jesse, he loves like hard rock, classic rock music, right? But he doesn't listen to albums the way that like maybe like yourself or I would. Like, he's not into the albums. He more listens to the stuff that you hear on the radio. So for him, Back in Black would be an album for somebody like my cousin Jesse. Like, he listens to the radio, he knows Shoot to Thrill, he knows Shook Me All Night Long, right? But if you're a fan of acdc, I mean, you get into the weeds with High Voltage, and it's probably their best album start to finish. Like, you could go on a road trip. You cannot put this vinyl on sitting at home because you'll just want to get up and move somewhere. As soon as Long Way to the Top starts, which is an excellent way to start an album, you're going to want to go, right? So when you jump in your car and you put on High Voltage, like, it's like an experience. It's definitely a road trip type of album. And you go from song to the next. So you go from It's a Long Way to the Top to Rock and Roll Singer and The Jack. And those songs, which have that heavy bluesy type of feel to them, bring you down a little bit so that you're not doing 100 all the way to where you're going. You kind of remember, oh yeah, I got to step on the brake a little bit. And it's just the humor in High Voltage also, I think, is a little underplayed as well. I like the humor of it. I like some of the songs. She's Got Balls. And I think it's humorous without being as silly as stuff like Who Made Who is later on, right? So to me, it's just the classic acdc album. Back in Black, it's like a greatest hits album, and I'm not going to argue that, and I'm not going to argue album sales. It's more just kind of like, it's the same kind of argument that I made with Hotter Than Hell, right? Like, if you're a Kiss fan, you're probably a little bit bored of Destroyer. If you're an acdc fan, maybe Back in Black kind of maybe gets a little overplayed, especially when you hear it on the radio all the time. But I mean, if you're an acdc fan, you can't argue against High Voltage being right up there with those other albums that we mentioned, Highway to Hell and Back in Black, for me personally.
Okay, so I see what you're saying, but I want to hit you with a little bit of the tricky question here. Which High Voltage are you talking about? The North American or the Australian?
Right, well, I don't want to look stupid here, but basically, you're right. There is a huge difference between the Australian version and the North American version. I mean, they're almost two totally different albums. And really, kind of, I'm more arguing for the actual original TNT album, which almost has the same song list as High Voltage. But this High Voltage was the one that we got here in North America. This was the one that I picked up, and this is the one that identifies High Voltage. So whether you consider I'm arguing for High Voltage or TNT, which have similar song titles, I'm going with the North American High Voltage version. The Australian High Voltage version has almost a totally different set list. But I think later on, I could be wrong, don't hit me too hard for this, but I think even this High Voltage version ended up in the Australian market later on. I think this is the version that the UK got. So I think this is probably the more recognized high voltage when people, this is what you think about more when you think about high voltage. So well, I get what you're saying as well.
I don't have enough knowledge to be able to corroborate any of that, but I'm sure we've got some historians in the comments there, and maybe one of you can let us know if we've got those statistics right.
It's a little messy, for sure.
So, I get what you're saying, but for someone like me, you're trying to convince, not a huge AC/DC fan, but someone who definitely has enjoyed every single song on Back in Black, and you talked about how hard, more ardent fans of AC/DC are gonna maybe pass Back in Black and maybe go for something with Bon Scott instead of Brian Johnson, and more kind of that grimier feel. But I would argue there's almost a unifying, like, communal feeling. Like, you put on a song from Back in Black in your car. If you have anyone in that car with you, they're gonna know. Like, my mom will be able to sing along with Back in Black. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for a rock band, I think maybe with AC/DC, not to deride them or anything, but they're a simpler band. So, can you maybe speak to why you think a more authentic sounding album is better for a band that, while they're not pop, they're definitely fall into that range of just fun rock, where you don't need to think about it. It's about production and riffs and having a good time. So how would you say High Voltage can compete with that? Because Back in Black is really the peak of their production, and they've taken that craft of those 3.5 minute probably hard rock, just chugging along party songs, and really perfected it on Back in Black. Do you have any sort of counter to that?
Yeah, I do actually. Back in Black is an excellent album. I'm not arguing that that's a bad album at all. I think that's the type of album that's going to get fans in the door, and I think an album like High Voltage is going to get them to stick around. And you know what? If you listen to High Voltage, there's actually some tracks on there that break the 4-minute mark, like 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes. Not many. There's a couple, but I mean, there's definitely more of a hard rock, bluesy feel to High Voltage. If you like that style of music, you're going to like High Voltage. Back in Black is definitely harder. Definitely has the more recognizable hits, right? But like I said, High Voltage is going to kind of keep you in the same type of mood for an album, because you're also looking at albums as a collection of songs that are kind of cohesive and kind of play out, and High Voltage is the kind of album that you can put on and play it out all the way to the start. You don't need to just take one song and hear it randomly on the radio and not really think about it once it's done, right? Like, You Shook Me All Night Long, you're going to hear it on the radio out of context. You don't need anything else, and that's great. It's a hit, right? But when we're talking about albums, I just think it's the best album, and I think it's definitely the best early AC/DC album, in my opinion, and I think it trumps a lot of the later albums. Now, am I arguing that it's technically better produced, or technically has better hits, or sold more than Back in Black? Definitely not. AC/DC High Voltage is my favorite album, and that's where a lot of this argument is coming from, because if it's my favorite, then it's the one I think is the best. So, technically, when you look at all the statistics, is it better than Back in Black? I'm saying it's at least neck and neck with Back in Black. I think it's right up there. Highway to Hell as well, right? I think it's right up there with those ones. My personal favorite is High Voltage. I love Live Wire. Like, I could go on and list those songs. And one thing also, just doing some research for the album that I had read, and I don't know how true this is because AC/DC has a lot of albums, but Little Lover is apparently one of the only kind of ballady songs that they've ever done. So if you want to hear something unique that AC/DC you won't find on any other AC/DC albums, it's going to be Little Lover, right? I just think I think it's a great album. I'm not going to say Back in Black's worse, Back in Black's not a bad album. It's one of the best rock albums of all time. But if you're an acdc fan, High Voltage has to be right up there.
Well, I'll have to give it a try because it's compelling what you're saying, but I mean, Back in Black is like to me, most of AC/DC's albums are, you know, like a rocky mountain. You know, there's goes up, has a dip, goes up, has a dip. You know, but ultimately it gets there.
Mm-hmm.
But Back in Black is just like a solid piece of granite. You know, it's just like peak whole way across. So for someone who's not a huge AC/DC fan, then what value can you say the album has that would make it be able to stand up to a giant? Because this is really like a David versus Goliath fight. You know, like High Voltage is down here throwing a little rock,
right?
And Back in Black is just stomping millions of sales. It's a weird analogy. Trying to go with it though.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and it is tough to argue that. Back in Black is definitely one of the greatest hard rock albums ever made. And it is, I do think you're kind of getting the upper hand just with that song list from Back in Black that you've mentioned. Like almost every song off that album is a hit. You could call Back in Black AC/DC Greatest Hits, and anybody would pick it up and not really notice that it wasn't a Greatest Hits album. Like, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
But, like I said, I'm arguing from what's my favorite, what album do I put on start to finish, and enjoy start to finish, and that's High Voltage. I throw that on in the car, and it's an experience. High Voltage is an experience.
Yeah.
Back in Black is something that you're going to hear it on the radio every day for the rest of your life, you know?
Yeah. That is actually a good point. You know, there might be something to say about, you know, like you were saying, some songs that you take your foot off the gas, and some songs really drive you to push it. And Back in Black, I'm supposed to be defending it here, but I can't really honestly say, like, it doesn't have that dynamic range, and dynamic range means something else, but in what we're saying, like, it's just all go all the time. And I'm not sure if I'd actually want to listen to Back in Black all the way through these days, because like you said, I've heard all of them so many times. So I am, since I just conceded a little bit there, I'm going to try and hit you with one last hard point.
You're too nice of a guy. That's
Bon Scott, Brian Johnson. I don't have my notes on me right here, but I can't remember which reviewer it was. We'll have to quote him in the description. But he described Bon Scott's vocals as annoyingly aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't deny that with the slightly lower production value and with that slightly sillier sound, that is maybe not a fair criticism, but there's some truth to it. Like, sometimes Bon Scott can get a little you know, and Brian Johnson, I think, just because of the value of the production and knowing how to balance out the frequencies, they really kind of smooth that out.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but Bon Scott and Brian Johnson, to me, almost are kind of in the same category for rock singers. Like, I wouldn't say one of them is an exceptional singer. I just think both of them have excellent voices for hard rock.
Yes. I want to make it clear, I wasn't deriding Bon Scott. I was just saying that's what the review said, and there's a little element of that.
In terms of silliness, I don't think High Voltage is silly. I think some of the stuff with Bon Scott later, like I had mentioned earlier, like Who Made Who and stuff like this, I think that's a little silly. But I think High Voltage, and I think maybe what you're referring to is the humor of some of the songs, and I think High Voltage has humor, but I don't think it's silly. I think it definitely is like a straight-ahead hard rock blues album, High Voltage, for sure. In terms of comparing the two voices, like, production's going to make a difference however your voice sounds.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not a production guy. I know you and Martin talk about the production a lot. I'm more of like a song guy. I like the feeling, the experience, and the songs of an album rather than technically hearing where levels don't sound quite correctly to me. Because really, in that sense, you can take any album and fix the production or re-record the production in certain ways, right? But you can't you can't mess with bad songs too much, right? And I'm not saying Back in Black has bad songs. I just think that when it comes to production, it only takes you some of the way. You got to have the musicianship, the talent, the songwriting skills to get you that full way. So in terms of production, I can't blame albums like High Voltage, like Hotter Than Hell, too much for the production, because I mean, if these bands had money at the time, the production would probably sound a lot better, right? That's why their later albums like Back in Black sound better, is because of the groundwork that albums like High Voltage made that got them to that place where they're raking all this money in. and that they can produce these excellent sounding albums and get the greatest producers around and get the greatest, maybe even studio musicians, and get the greatest equipment, right? That came later. Stuff like High Voltage, and to a lesser extent Hotter Than Hell with my argument with Kiss, this is the foundation of what the band is, and that's what keeps people at the party. Back in Black's going to bring them in. It's going to be like the welcome mat, but High Voltage, those albums, which I'm really arguing for TNT, those are the albums that are going to get them to stay. I think High Voltage is an excellent album. It's my favorite. I'll put it on any day. I put it on the way here, and I couldn't get to this office sooner. You know, like I love High Voltage. I couldn't wait to get here to argue it. So,
well, it's
passion. You know, like as a fan, I'm passionate about High Voltage. Whereas, you know, somebody who listens to the radio might be like, yeah, Back in Black, and then go home and shut the radio off and live the rest of their life.
Yeah. Right? Well, no, that's true. I mean, like that. I'm definitely guilty of that. I love acdc, love Back in Black, but I'm not really a mega fan. I'm not gonna go and like you said, like I'm gonna put it on the radio and enjoy it when it's there, but I'm not really going out and looking for it. Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't know. It's hard for me to say what, you know, that Back in Black is objectively better in this sort of argument, because you definitely got me beating the knowledge base and the passion. Oh. So I think we'll have to call it there. We don't really have much more we can say about it. What do you guys think? Is Back in Black just a pinnacle that can't be toppled, or is there some room there for some fan favorites like High Voltage or TNT? Or maybe the other High Voltage, you know, or the other depending TNT. On what country you live in.
All right, and remember to check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, www.martinpopoff.com. Remember to give this album or this book a check, album by album, acdc, and follow us and subscribe.
Mm-hmm. Don't forget to like the video, and if you want to get notifications, ring the little bell beside the subscribe button. Alright folks, so that's our 15th episode, and that means that Season 1 is wrapped. But don't worry, we'll be back quite soon with Season 2. It's already starting to be filmed, and we have lots of big bands and wrong albums to choose.
Yeah, a couple of ones that are coming up would be Black Sabbath and UFO, so keep your eyes peeled and stay tuned for some more Contrarians coming your way.
That's right, we might even have another punk band or two.
And I won't let this guy get the better of me, I'll get it.
I see what you're saying, and that's a great defense.
Hello. Hey, how are you? We're just right in the middle.